Hi everyone! So we're going to do another quilting project. So this right here is some of my newest fabric. And this one obviously is more of a Halloween or fall harvesty kind of fabric. And there's 3 different panels. So you've got the scarecrow, there's an owl, and a cat. And I'm going to make a table runner using these 3 fabrics for, your holiday table. Anyway, I decided on this kind of starry night, I guess, because this is night, but I wanted a lighter fabric. So I'm going to use this fabric, and this is going to be a narrow border. It'll be a finished 1-inch border, so we'll have to cut it about 1 3/4, but just a really narrow border around all of them. And then I'm going to use this. I thought it was a cute little whimsical fabric, so we're going to use this for the outside and kind of to finish off the edges and things like that. So we are going to get started with that. Like I said, the first thing I am going to do is cut off this border, and also you can find these on my website, StephanieRicchieArt.com, and order those. They come just like this. And then find yourself some fabric that you love for Halloween or harvesty fabric. I had another fabric that I'm going to do something else with, but this is kind of a fun option too. This is kind of a wood grain, and then something a little bit more elegant, just wheat. But anyway, pick some fabric and we will get started. Okay, so I've cut 2 of these. You see how I've cut the borders off. And one thing to note, it is fabric, so you are going to come up, so this is perfectly square, but the pictures don't always print exactly square because it is fabric, and it's hard to get those square because you never know at the factory if the bolts of fabric got wound on there crooked or whatever. Anyway, so don't worry about it though, because we're not going to see any of that anyway, and we'll just have the picture when we're done. So the last one, I'll just show you, if I have to put that up, what I did. So the first thing I do is square up one side. Just pick one. Usually I do a side, the longest side, but these are square pieces, so it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to cut it to my 9.5, so it's going to be a finished 9 inches, finished size. If I can make a move, there we go. And then I have 2 straight square edges, so I'm just going to go off of that and square one of these sides. And make sure that, so my 1/4 inch here is into the black, but my 1/4 inch here is still in the orange. So I'm going to scooch it over just a little bit because, like I said, the picture may not have gotten printed on there exactly straight. Cut that and then square this one. So let's cut correctly. And there are my 9.5 inch squares. So finished size will be that 9 inches. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut my star fabric to 1 3/4 inch strips. I'm just going to need enough to go around each one of those. And so I'll probably cut like 3 or 4 strips and then see how far that gets me. Alright, so I have this laid out and folded, and I'm going to line it up on a line that leaves me enough excess that I can make sure I cut this straight. So I first want to square off this edge. Alright, and then I'm going to go, so I can get 1 strip will do 1 square, so I need 3 strips at 1 3/4 inch. Alright, so we have our strips, and so these would go, get it unfolded, right around, and I'm going to press these before I put them on there, but right around the border like that. So I'm going to go and press these just so that they're easy to work with and sew, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I might have my 1 3/4 inch strips cut here, and I'm going to now cut, let me move this stuff, this fabric, and we're going to do a 3 3/4 inch strip of these, and I'm probably going to cut 4 just because it's probably going to be too short for some of them. I'll probably need an extra piece on one of them, or on each one of them, because I think I will run out. It'll be too short for the 4th side. Anyway, I'm going to cut 4 of these, 3 3/4 of an inch. Okay, really quick before I cut this fabric, one thing to take note, so this is something I noticed and I actually really like. This fabric is directional, so all the pumpkins are facing, the stems are all up. So pay attention to the direction of the pattern on your fabric, because you may sewing it, you may want to make sure it's all up in all directions, or you may want to make it going out in all directions, and I'm not sure which I'm going to do, but you need to remember that when you're cutting and when you're sewing. So all of my strips are going to be this way so that I have pumpkins going around. Anyway, so we're going to get these cut, and then I'm going to press these. Alright, so we now have all of the pieces cut, and we are ready for assembling. And the first thing we're going to do is sew our stars around each of the squares, and then we're going to sew this around each of the squares, so it's going to also go in between. You could actually just put the stars in between and then just put this border, depending on how long you want it. This one with the stars as well as the pumpkins in between is going to be about 42 inches long, if I remember correctly. If you don't want one that long, I would recommend just using this fabric for like a finished border around the edge, and then this fabric, or whatever fabric you pick, something just to go in between and kind of around, and then call that good. But I still haven't decided actually, but I think I will do the pumpkins and this because my table's a little bit longer. Anyway, we'll get started with that. Alright, so with everything cut, we're going to sew these together, and I'm going to just, because this is the same fabric and these are all the same side, we're going to do this really easy. I'm just going to lay this down. If you watch some of my other videos, you know this is how I do a lot of things. Cut that. Just going to cut that one. Just leaving a little bit of excess. And they're all the same length. I could actually really just cut them. But we'll do that. And then I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to do right sides together. So all of them, and then we'll press them, and then we'll come back. Alright, so because we cut a little excess, we can leave just a tiny bit sticking out on top to square off here in a minute. And then 1/4 inch seam allowances. Alright, so if you've ever watched me sew before, you know that always I just press out. This one is going to be an exception because I don't want any of that orange showing through, because this is a white fabric. So this one I'm actually going to press away from the white on all my stuff. Even on the next row, it's going to be pressed away from the white. Okay, so we have all of them with the stars on one side. So now I'm going to take my leftover piece here for one side, and I'm going to actually just cut it. And this little piece can be for whatever. We'll just save it. Who knows when we'll need it again someday. So we're going to do all 3 pieces out of our next piece of fabric. Next pieces. And then we will do the same thing as we just did on the other sides, and sew these on and press them. Okay, so now we've got all our side pieces on all of these, and we're going to square these up before we move on to the other side pieces. So we're going to just square up top and bottom, but we're going to make sure we're still at 9.5 inches. And there is 3. Okay, so we have our 3 pieces. The next step is to take more of our star fabric, and we're just going to go top and bottom. And then I'm going to show you how to sew those on. And again, I'm just going to cut, I'm just going to cut these approximately the right length, and then sew them on right sides together. So I'm going to have to cut one more strip. Well, I could add these 2 together. Maybe I will. Alright, so I was a short one, but we just used that little tiny piece. that I had from one of the other ones, and then the extra from that last strip. Just so that we utilize all of that fabric. And then I don't have very much left over. Just have a little tiny piece of cut off right there. Alright, so we're going to sew these on and then press, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now we have all of our borders on, and the next thing we need to do is square these up. So we know that our center is 9 inches square, and I need an inch here, but I need my seam allowance still. So I'm going to square it up to just over 10 and a quarter. I'm going to go maybe 10 3/8, just so that I have a little bit of excess, because I know that my presser foot is a little bit wider than 1/4 of an inch. So I have these sides that I've already done, and I'm going to use these sides a little bit here for the first line. So I'm going to go, so I could go 1 1/4, but I'm going to go just a little bit past that on my ruler and just kind of pick and go straight down that one. Whoops. Okay, and then I'm going to do these two edges that I just sewed on, using this bottom edge as my straight edge. Whoops, not that wide though. Cut off the excess there, and then I'm going to cut off, the excess around here. But I'm going to, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera. I want to go to about 20 3/4, no, not 20 3/4, 9, 10, 11, 21 3/4 if I can. But I need these all to be the same size, so I'm not going to get 21 3/4. But really what I need is right there, 21 1/2. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this edge. 21, so 20 being my, I'm starting at 10. But I'm going to make sure that we're square, square, square. And then we end up at 21 1/2, or 11 1/2, I should say. And then I just need to do the same thing on all of these, squaring them up to 11 1/2 by 11 1/2. Alright, so we are going to, all these are cut square to 11 1/2 inches. And the next thing we need to do is decide which panel will be where, as far as for the table runner. And I don't know, I think I'm going to put the trees on the outside and then the scarecrow in the middle. Just because the tree, sorry, you probably can't see that. The tree on the owl is on the left, the tree on the cat is on the right. So our next step is to take our strips of pumpkin. So I'm only going to need 1 strip in between each of these panels. So we'll move that out. Hopefully it's not clear out of the screen. So 1 here and then 1 here. So I'm going to make it so that my pumpkins, remember we talked about the way the pumpkins are facing, and they're facing up. And because they are facing up, on the edges they're going to be facing out. So in the center, I'm also going to be facing them out. Now, if you wanted to, you could cut your fabric so that the pumpkins are going this way, and then make sure everything's all facing up. To me, I don't know, it doesn't matter. but I am going to face them out like this. So I'm going to sew one on, and actually I'll just cut this one, rough cut it for you here. And then one here. Again, we'll just rough cut that. But this one, remember, is going this way. So the stems are all going out. And I'm going to go sew those onto the 3 panels so that we make one long panel, and then we'll be back. Alright, so I got 2 sides on, and I was going to stitch the other ones on just by eyeballing across, and I thought that's probably not the best idea. So I'm going to just really quickly make sure these are square again, lining them up on my grid on these edges, and then I'm going to cut these off so that I know for sure that I am exactly square still. So now I can sew these 2 together, right sides together, and then I can put the last panel right here on this one. Okay, so we have our 3 panels sewn together, and now we're going to put on the rest of our border, and this is the last step in the top. So remember, we have our directional pumpkins. Now for me, I'm going to make them all point out. So I'm going to go, so they're pointing out this way, and then up here they're pointing out that way. And when it's all said and done, I mean, you're going to have to look at it somewhat closely to see that they're even pumpkins, so it probably doesn't even really matter, but I guess it does to me. Anyway, so you can poke them whichever way you want, but I'm going to go and stitch the top and the bottom on, and then we'll press, and we'll come back and look at the sides. Alright, so we have both of our top and bottom borders on, and so the next step is going to be to cut this side to square. So I'm going to follow these 2 seam lines and a little bit this edge, but this can be stretched a little bit by the sewing machine, so probably this is pretty square, but these ends may not be square. Okay, so those are cut square. And now we're going to add on our last 2 pieces. So this is one scrap from one of the others, probably from these shorter pieces here. And then I'm going to cut one for the other end, and we will sew them on and press them. Alright, so we have our ends stitched on, both ends. So our last step here is to remove my stuff here, is to square up the whole piece. So we can't really square up these edges by laying it here and going down. Obviously we're off the table on both ends. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half. And this is how I square up quilts too. And then I'm going to take and get lined up right here where these seams match up on both sides. Going to just, not over here on the edge, but over here, just put a pin just to hold it here so I can make sure I can do this edge. Okay, now what I'm going to do is down here on the bottom, I'm going to line up this on a straight line, straight grid line. And I'm not going to worry too much about these edges being on a straight grid line. I'm going to go off of this grid line here at the bottom with my ruler, and we'll just straighten the whole thing out as we go along here. Which it looks like, though, we're fairly straight on a grid line on this side, just a tiny bit off, but not much. Okay, so now I'm going to cut down this side first, just because I'm right-handed, and I want this finished width to be 3 inches, but remember we still have to put a back on this, and so we need that 3 1/4 on each side, and I'm going to be going off of this seam line here, because that's a finished edge, so 3 1/4 from there. All right, so there's 2 sides. Now I need to cut these ends, but I'm going to leave it like this just because everything's square now. I'm going to turn it. Actually, maybe I will turn my board back. And I'm going to turn this, and again I'm going to line this up on 2 because obviously it's a 1/2 inch wider than the, any grid. So just line up the edges. Oops, sorry, I kicked my camera. All right, that is a finished top. Hold on, if I can get it open. Oh wait, we got a pin. There we go. So we have our owl, our scarecrow, and our cat. And if you notice the pumpkins, you can't really, if you look really close, you notice it, but mostly you just notice the color. It's very harvesty in color. I thought about doing possibly leaves on one or leaves on a pillow or something, but anyway. So there's a lot of options there. So the last step on something like this is the backing, which I believe, which I'm going to use this starry fabric just because I have it and because it matches really well. And then possibly machine quilting some of this or hand quilting. I haven't decided which. The hand quilting on something like this would be super simple, as well as the machine quilting, because I would basically just go around each one of these borders because it is a table runner. We don't need to worry about it bunching as much or those kinds of things. If you're worried about that, you could do, like the moon or something like that with some hand quilting as well. And maybe I'll do that. I'm not sure. But anyway, so that's the top, and we will move on to the rest of the quilt. Okay, so for the next step, or maybe I guess the last step, kind of, well, it's probably just the next step. You're going to need a little bit of batting. And I just used batting from something else, a different project, and I kept some of the batting, or the pieces, and it comes in handy for things like this. And then you're going to cut it about the same size as your table runner. I think I called it quilt last time I was doing something with it. And then spread it out. And I'm not going to cut this off until I'm all done sewing around it. Oops, my iron's turning off. And then you need a piece of backing. And like I said, I'm going to use this star fabric for my backing and cut it the same size. And this one, I cut it, it just barely makes it with one piece. So I'm going to line this up, and it's going to have to go over the edge just a tiny bit on this one end. Then pull it out. This other end, and actually maybe I will put that down first because I need to be able to see the other one. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this all together, and then we're going to sew around the outside edge. So I'm going to pin the outside edges together. Alright, with that all pinned, we're going to sew around the edges all the way around, but one thing you need to remember is to leave an opening. So I'm going to leave an opening down at one end, probably this end. And I like to put extra pins in there so that I don't forget. but that's where I'm leaving my opening. And so I'm going to cut, it doesn't have to be huge, but you need to be able to get the whole table runner through your opening. I always make mine too small and then I kind of struggle. But, oops, there's another thing. Okay, so we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around it. Alright, so we're going to maintain our 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like with everything else. And just remember, you're going on the edge of your, what is this called? A table runner, not quilt. So regardless of where the batting or the backing is, follow the edge of your table runner. And I'm going to pull that and get started. Now I'm going to back stitch right here because this is my opening. And I don't want that to come open. So off we go. Okay, so we have it all sewn all the way around the edges, and at this point now I'm going to cut off any excess. So we're really quickly going to go all the way around the edge, cutting off the excess batting, excess fabric, but leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance. You don't want to cut too far. Okay, now before we turn it, I'm going to cut off the corners close to the stitching so that the corners push out straight. So I gotta cut the other direction. All right, now we can turn it. So you've got your hole, and again, mine is probably smaller than it should be, but we're gonna turn it right sides out. Okay, so now we're turned around, and I'm just going to really quickly make sure my corners will come out. And sometimes it helps to take a pin. You can take like a crochet hook on the inside. This is just kind of long to get down there. All right, so the next thing we're going to do before we close up that seam is we're going to press this so that we can make sure that all the outside edges are pressed where we want them to be. Okay, so we have everything sewn together, and our next step is to press this. So one thing you need to be aware of as you press is that you want to make sure that you're right on the seam. So this, pressing like this, the seam is about 1/8 of an inch tucked in. So I like to, you can lick your fingers or whatever and roll it out to the edge. Actually, let's start down here at the corner. Roll it out, and if it's got the batting, it can kind of roll like this. And kind of make sure that your top piece is what's showing. As far as you don't want your backing to be up on the top. And then just work your way down and around, making sure you're out to the edge where you need to be. Okay, so this has been pressed now, and you can leave it like this if you wanted. I'm going to now take and sew around the very outside edge like 1/4, maybe 1/2 inch, just a decorative stitch. So you're going to want to make sure you have a thread that will match. I mean, this, I could do a black, I could do my white still, I could do an orange thread. I haven't decided yet, I have to see what I have. And then the other option, and I'm still debating, is to just really quickly quilt around the squares with the machine. Something this small, I probably won't hesitate in using my machine. I've done bigger quilts on my machine, but I don't have a walking foot, and so it doesn't work as well. It pulls the fabric different ways. So, but the first thing I am going to do before I do any of that is stitch my and my opening shut. So this has to be done by hand. So I'm going to do that by hand really quick, and then we'll sew the border around it. Okay, so the first thing to do is tie your knot. And it's a pretty simple knot to tie. Let me move my camera up here a little bit. Okay, and then you're just going to hide your knot kind of in one of these sides. I like to go, now I won't be able to do anything here because you're watching. Okay. And then I'm just going to go from side to side, stitching this closed. So pick up some fabric there, pick up some fabric on the other side, and just go along. Trying to stay inside that pressed edge that we just pressed just a minute ago. Alright, so there's that end stitched together, and I'm just going to press that and you won't ever really even see it. So now we're going to go sew around the outside edge. Alright, so we're going to stitch around, let me get this in place, stitch around the outside, and I opted for a black thread in the top and a white thread in the bottom because the back is white, the top has lots of colors, and if I do decide to quilt around this, I want the black thread in there anyway. So it doesn't matter where you start, you just start, and I'm going to maintain, we'll go 3/8 of an inch. And on this, you do want to back stitch because this will be a finished stitch. And then just stitch all the way around. Okay, so the border around here has now been stitched down, and that just kind of holds it and makes it look nice. You can end here, and it'll be beautiful, and it'll stay put. It's not like a quilt. So quilting, the reason you quilt around a quilt is to hold the two layers together from shifting with the batting inside. So it holds everything in place. This is not going to be used as a quilt. It's obviously going to be used as a table runner or a piece of decoration, so it probably won't be getting used as hard, I guess, would be the thing, as a quilt or something like that. So at this point, this is where we could quit. I think I am going to try it on my machine. We'll see how well it works, and stitch around these squares just to give a little more depth and dimension to it. So one of the things we have to do that is we need to pin down this really well. And you want to start in the middle, but even though I'm starting in the middle, usually you start in the very center and work your way out. I'm actually, well, I don't know, I'm going to do one of these two seams. I was thinking of doing the outside one first, but maybe I'll do the inside one. Anyway, we're going to stitch around, but you need to pin really well. You don't want to pin right where you're going to stitch. So I'm going to pin somewhat close, and I'll have to pull these as I go along. Actually, maybe I'll go sideways a little bit. And I'm going to stitch in the ditch, which means stitching in the seam line as much as I can. That all depends on how good you are at following a straight line. Sometimes I follow a straight line well, and sometimes I don't. But I'm going to pin all the way around this particular square on the inside and the outside. Okay, so this is pinned down. Now this may be an exercise in the practice that doesn't work. We'll find out. Anyway, so one of the reasons why you need the walking foot for big, for big stuff is that it pulls, so the feed dogs try to feed faster than it can slide through because of the thickness of the quilt or whatever you're doing because of the batting. So you have to just be really, really conscientious about how you hold it and that it's feeding at the same rate so that you don't end up with this pulling way down, you know, or pulling different than the bottom of the fabric or the bottom of the table runner. So we are going to go try, and we may end up quilting this by hand or leaving it like it is and unpicking the stitches, but we'll find out. Okay, so I'm going to start on the inside because that's where the black is. And it's a lot about holding everything and keeping everything taut, like side to side and forward and backward. So we'll go slow, and again, you need a back stitch for this. Okay, so we're going to unpin that and see how we did here. And the goal is that it's not too puckery, which it, ouch, is not. So this side looks pretty good. It's not pulling the outside too much, and we're going to turn it over to make sure it's not puckering anything back here. Oops, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to now go around this edge, but I think I might adjust these pins a little bit before I go and do that. Okay, so we've got both rounds done, and I'm going to pull the pins out. And it did pull a little bit, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera. I'll show you here in a second. So right down here, you can see there's a little bit of a wrinkle, and this wasn't quite straight. And then it pulled down here a little bit, so there's a little excess here, but I actually feel like overall, it did what I wanted it to do, and the back didn't pucker anywhere. That's always a plus. So, I think this can just be pressed and it'll be fine. So I'm going to call that success, and I'm going to move on to pinning these two sides and quilting those. Okay, so this is the finished table runner, and don't look at my stitching, sometimes I'm not straight on that quilting, but that's the finished piece, and that's what it looks like on my table. I have to stand on a chair, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed that project, and if you, again, are looking for these panels, they are available on my website, stephanieritchieart.com. Thanks for watching.